Well, hello, everybody. Ed, you want me to plug this in someplace?
I can hear you.
Can you? All right, good. Well, thank you for coming out today. Everybody's made it out on this beautiful day today. And particularly, I want to thank you guys for being into music, because music is probably the one universal art I can think of. Of course, visual arts are too, of course, but music is so important and vital. And what I've done with posters is pretty much to enhance what I could with performance of music in the old days as well as anymore today as well. But coming to the Ozarks, I think I'm going to give you a little background on that, because in the 60s, living out in San Francisco, and why I came down or decided to move out here was because it just got too much out there, and there was no space. And so I decided, I always wanted to get some land on and farm and so forth eventually too, because it's the most independent way of being sure of a livelihood. That was my theory at the time. And so we moved out here in 1976, and been happily here ever since, really, except we do have to occasionally go back to the Bay Area and visit our good friends from San Francisco and stay in touch. But it's kind of interesting because the first musician that I remember that was from the Ozarks when I was a kid, or a young, teenager, was Porter Wagner. And he had this great song. It was called About a Satisfied Mind. And probably you guys, you musicians, probably all remember this or know of it. And I used to listen to it, on our stations out there in the foothills, California, where I went to high school, grew up. And it wasn't that different from the Ozarks, really. Placerville, Auburn area. And in terms of the hills and so forth, a little different temperature, and it went up to mountains, wasn't quite like this. But it was kind of interesting because the satisfied mind thing, and that was my first real awareness of the Ozarks, I guess you could say, in terms of music or thinking about the Ozarks. And we decided my wife and I, and we had a little pickup with a camper on it, and we took out, and I had a Strout Realty catalog and a United Farm catalog, and we went out looking for a farm, and so we traveled for about, finally after about 4 weeks, we finally found a place. But we went, first I wanted to stay within the kind of the latitudes of where we were in California, which I kind of stay within the sun being at a certain angle, and so forth. And so we went across pretty much the country, and really to see what we could find. And finally, having looked all over the place, and my wife had our last child, our youngest child, in Nashville, and I couldn't find a place in Nashville really. And so finally, she's a brand new baby and everything. We're at the Days Inn Motel, because we traveled out of just the cash we had from selling our house. And still had enough to buy a farm with, put a down payment on something. And I said to her, I said, where do you want to go? I mean, we've looked all over the place, and there are a lot of good places to settle down, but where would you like to go? And she said, I'd like to be near Eureka Springs, Arkansas, so, okay. And so we packed up and went to as close to Eureka Springs as we could, and over near Cassville. We stayed there for several weeks at this little motel over there looking for a place. And Arkansas is just too up and down, too hilly for me. I like kind of the rolling hills and a little flat and stuff, because I was interested in cattle farming, where you don't just have woods, but you have, hayfield or something. So finally we found the place we did find, and managed to get it, buy it, put our down payment on it and settle in on there. And the place was just really a ramshackle place. But we couldn't afford anything better than that because we just had what we sold our house for. And then ever since then, we've just been kind of building it up, and a little bit of cattle, you know, and then after a year or so, I had to get a job, of course, because I ran out of money. And then I ended up working for 8 years for the utility up here. And that was really good. I was in the graphics art department, you know, at the utility for a while, which was forms, making forms and various printing projects and so forth. And it got to be, you know, kind of it was really a pretty good job, really considering. And then finally about 1985, I was able to get back into art again. And then I've been pretty much doing art ever since. Of course, then my wife, who also decided that she needed to do something with her life, and it went to studied psychology. That really helped a lot. And then she got into that, started making some real money. And so it's been one of those kind of deals. But still, in about, I guess it was about 1985 when that was when I did resign from my job and kind of retire from day-to-day work and commuting. Got back into art again. And pretty much worked into meeting people. We met quite a few people in this area that were into music, especially like Chris and people over in Reed Spring and Jeanette, who has the Rock House, and at that time she even had a gallery over there. And so we've been kind of doing that, kind of getting established that way. And but at the same time now, I've kept up my connections out in California. And the bands and the people I knew out there, you know, Jerry Garcia's gone now, but, you know, the bands, the various, you know, casualties of, I would say the casualties of the 60s. There were a lot of overdoing it, you know, and didn't help the health of a lot of people. But stayed in touch, and now at this time, I'm pretty much been doing things for a band out there called Moon Alice, which kind of embodies all the characteristics of the 60s in San Francisco, or the better parts of the 60s. And they're still maintaining it, and so I keep doing posters for them. And I've been doing, well, when Chris started Fernando's, I remember Chris had this idea. He was going to start a place over in Reed Spring, and it was a good place to do it. And I don't think he had any in terms of money, and so he got this old storefront over there, and he turned it into an incredible music place. And so I remember, you know, thinking, God, no, Chris has got a good thing going here. So I tried to do my best I could with the amount of money. He couldn't afford a fancy poster or anything like that. So pretty much these ones here that he was showing, you know, those, he would do like, get these things together, and I just bought a Mac at that time, I think. And so these are kind of, you know, these put together with the basics that I put together with a very primitive Mac, the first little Mac with a little 9-inch diagonal screen on it, you know, and it was black and white, everything, and so that was kind of fun. And then Chris, you know, and some of these, like Ricky and Rockets and Distant Relative, fascinating, and then all kinds of incredible bands, and then Chris, of course, doing things too, and then Monday night jams, which were a big deal. In fact, I remember I was over there one time, and there was people from Leonard Skinner's band came down, because they were over in Branson. And there was a guy there from the Paul Butterfield band even, you know, up in Chicago. And that I actually had dealings with out in California, the Paul Butterfield band. So it's quite a central thing, this region and the Branson area for music and how people appreciate it. And so after all these years of being here, like we've been here, gosh, since '76, it's over 30 years, and the neighbors have finally decided we're here to stay. And so that's good, because when we first got there, of course, we were just traveling California hippies, and our cows. In fact, one of our neighbors, I remember at one point, they had a big garden. One of our very dear neighbors, they had a big garden, and they had it fenced off. And one day I was out in our garden. We had a big garden. We had tried to grow as much as we could, and I heard the neighbors swearing away over there, cussing, and what the heck, I couldn't see across the creek what was going on, but I kind of went around and looked around, and I said, all these black cattle over there. And I thought, oh my God. And then they were saying something about, every once in a while I hear the word hippies. And I figured, oh boy, my cattle got out, they're in there. And so I go across the creek, and Barbara, the wife of the fellow who owned that place and had been working on this great garden, was walking straight towards me, and she was really letting out her thoughts on what was happening with these hippies that don't take their fences too seriously. And I was very happy to notice that these cattle all had a brighter orange ear tag than mine, And then I also noticed that they weren't heifers, because I had bought several heifers. I had, mine were heifers and a couple of cows and a bull, and that they were steers. And I said, wait a minute, Barbara, those aren't mine. And she goes, oh. And she had somebody else to chew out, But they're always very helpful, our neighbors. And so eventually we kind of organized things on the place there and got our fences fixed and taking care of our, you got to get along with all your neighbors. And so then we've kind of blended in now, and we're part of the community down there, and getting along really good with our neighbors. But in terms of like the music and graphic arts connection, I think I'd have to say this, that we did out in San Francisco, we had just a wonderful thing there for about, I think it was about a year that we really had a fantastic, event happening in San Francisco during almost all of 1966, I think, and then into 67. But, people were cooperative, people were wanting to work together to solve problems. If somebody had a problem, we'd do a benefit. We'd get these musicians that get together and we'd do a poster, and we'd have benefits, and paid for a lot of stuff. In fact, Farm Aid type of thing. Farm Aid later was benefits that really helped a lot of farmers and so forth. So the connection really with me and music is mainly in my graphic arts and doing posters. And that was always a great pleasure, working with musicians, although it became later a big business deal and got more and more complicated. And once it gets too complicated, the business world gets too abstract, I think, away from, the basics of just the arts and music and so forth, maybe. But for a while there, for about a year, it was very, very helpful. And the connection between music, the community, and now like in Moonhouse, we call it the tribe, which goes back to the kind of the original idea we had back in the Haight-Ashbury, where there's kind of a tribe of unusual people that kind of got together with music. And in a sense, there's really always been a very large tribe of music appreciators in the Ozarks. Thank God there's people that are keeping the basic music together, the old-timey music, the appreciators that are keeping that sort of thing together. And there's also the innovative, electronic bunch, the rock and rollers, and that's something kind of interesting in San Francisco. We had the folk music people were really kind of interesting because you had poetry, you had serious, lyrics and so forth. And it was kind of a nice contrast to, the Beatles, when they came over here, it was like their first big hit was Hold My Hand, Wee, kind of stuff like that. And then we got into, there was Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan's kind of inspired, poetic, serious poetry, serious thinking. And of course, we also had the war in Vietnam going on then, which was a draft. People were getting drafted. and young men being hauled off to war. This didn't necessarily think was a good idea. And the more we learned about it, the more it seemed like a bad idea. And eventually it became a really big, bad problem. And unfortunately, through different events, benefits, and mixtures of music, art, and poetry, and all, we kind of made the case for peace. At least we thought we did. And so it kind of gradually had some influence. And I remember at one point in I think it was 1967, there was a news report or something, and I remember thinking, the war in Vietnam is going to be over. You know, that was so devastating to the country. Because I could kind of tell just from the news that the wave of understanding had taken hold across the country, and everybody was kind of seeing it for what it really could be in a bad way, and it was going to be stopped. And sure enough, later it did. And so there was a kind of an idealism in the music and the whole scene out there. And I don't think it was just regional, because it was across the country. There were people from the Ozarks out there. The Ozark Daredevils played out there. There were a lot of people came to San Francisco from all across the country. I think almost everybody was dissatisfied with something and was young and wanted to go west, and they came out there. A lot of people did. And so there was lots and lots of original songwriting, and the arts, the graphic art business really took off. And really a lot of artists started doing posters, and pretty quick there were 5 or 6 artists doing posters, and I wasn't the only one. That was kind of unusual, because I would do the design, then I'd do the printing, then I delivered it in my Volkswagen van. I did everything in the beginning. And I had very low budgets, there was no big budgets, like the first Family Dog, which was one of the promoters' names, the Family Dog Productions, put on a Fillmore thing with Tribal Stomp, it was called. And that was my first rock and roll poster. And the printing of that thing, and I did the artwork, the printing, and delivered the whole business for $60. The whole thing, $60. And so it was ultra inexpensive. And before you know it, there were things going on, people lots of students, of course, and younger people, but also a lot of kind of bohemian, artsy type people out there were getting into rock and roll. Rock and roll used to be just the silly music and the hold my hand wee bunch, but it got better and better. And then the Jefferson Airplane with their stuff, and the names of the Jefferson Airplane, what a great name for a band, that was really amazing. Grateful Dead, I never did think that was such a great name, but they always took about 20 minutes to tune up before they'd play. And that was always time to go get a drink, while they're tuning up. But they had great, soul, and people loved them, and they did free concerts in the park, But I do remember, and I'm just kind of telling you some things that are kind of interesting in my view, but there was a band called the Little Rascals or something. They're from Young Rascals, that's it. And they were from New York, and one time they came to the Fillmore, and I'll never forget this. When the Grateful Dead would get on stage, and they'd go dong 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 dong. They'd tune up, everybody would get ready to play, and then so forth. And but the Young Rascals got up there, and they were all set. Somehow they were already tuned up. Somehow everything was already, their amps were all stopped whining and stuff. And when their time came to play, they hopped out on that stage, the lights went on them, and they just, that first chord, and people started dancing within 5 minutes. It was just fantastic. So, we in the loosey-goosey world of let the Grateful Dead tune up for 20 minutes, got a taste of what that efficient, organizing time a little better was with the Young Rascals. They were pretty good. And but the Jefferson Airplane, they were good. They weren't so long in tuning up, you know, that type of thing. And but it was really a neat thing. And so when I came out here, and when we moved out here, I moved out here mainly because I couldn't deal really with the graphic arts world beyond that, when kind of it all went to the point where it was if you want to keep working West, you're going to have to go work for an ad agency, or you know, you're going to have to make more money. And there just wasn't, there were just so many people doing everything that it was time to really move on. I thought, you know, that's when I moved out here. But at the same time, it's kind of like there's a across the country feeling. In my case, I've always thought of being born and raised in California. I kind of think of, I've always thought of the country as being like part of the same place, you know, growing up in California. For instance, like the Civil War. You know, the Civil War was pretty much an Eastern thing, believe it or not. I mean, California, you know, growing up in California, you sort of think of the Civil War. Oh yeah, that was a hell of a deal, you know. But nobody related to it exactly. You know, it was something in the past, and people kind of remember somebody that knew something about it, but nobody paid that much attention to it. And there's this whole thing about the future. California's always been a future, being kind of the edge of the country, you know, and people would go out there and bump into the coast, and they'd have to figure out something. There's no other place to go, you know. And so it had that aspect to it. And it really is, it's really a very positive influence, I think, the music in general has had across the country, and how it, in fact, I remember I used to tell Chris down at Fernando's, it's kind of a religious experience to go out to hear music, live music, and be close to musicians, have a dance floor, you know, and dancing is a big deal. As a matter of fact, the concerts that we used to have out there were dances. And they were then, you know, when they got to be called dance concert, well, you know, there weren't seats exactly. There were seats around the dance floor, but people would dance, and it was kind of interesting. But now you go to a concert anyplace, it didn't take very long out there, and pretty quick they just set up chairs every place. And so people would go see the band rather than participate. You know, they'd watch and listen and sit in their chairs, and not much, you know, there'd be a little dancer or two down the very front maybe, but the dance thing kind of faded away a little bit out there when they started making more money by packing people into chairs and that type of thing, you know. And it was kind of changed that way, but that was a little different down at Fernando's, wasn't it, Chris? Yeah. That was kind of like a dance place. And this is something I think that everybody kind of can get a big kick out of, not just, you know, rock and rollers or anything, but the dancing idea. And then, of course, there's also cloggers and stuff now, right? Or there have been for a long time. But, you know, it's a different experience, you know. So it was, so coming out here was a big change for us, and my wife, especially my wife, my dear wife, who's put up with a lot of difficulties in moving from California. And her father was a screenwriter in Hollywood. She was born at Cedar and Lebanon Hospital down there. What a change. And now live in the Ozarks in an old building that her husband's fixing up. It has no insulation, and the black snakes get in the wall. All kinds of funny things happen in old farmhouses. And raising cattle instead of doing art, you know, and trying to make a living in a totally different place. But we were very lucky, and you know, God was on our side is the way I look at it. You know, saved us from a lot of disasters, from such a thing. And pretty much that's kind of getting here, you know, with our experience in getting here and getting set up, and then finally adjusting to this whole thing. And I think it's really kind of interesting to think that the country has we have a culture in this country. And it's, a lot of people think of the regionalism and all this stuff. I don't go with the regionalism thing because in California, foothills, or even in San Francisco or Los Angeles or anything, there's so much in common, and people have so much in common. And we have a country that, and this is just from my perspective of things, but I think we were basically started out as a Christian country with very good intentions. We had all these different types of religious fundamentalisms and different churches and their different ideas and stuff, but it's basically love your neighbor as yourself across this country. There's more of that than there isn't of that particular ethic, and that's, I think we can thank the early culture, the people that brought it in here in the first place, and for our greatness as a nation really is that inclusiveness of loving our neighbors as ourselves and learning and appreciating from all our neighbors wherever they're coming from. And this is something that I think is very, very interesting about the Ozarks. People, like for instance, my son had an accident when he was in high school, a bad car wreck, and just about died. Actually, we were lucky that he didn't die. And the entire area down where we live, I mean, there was just everybody that lived within anywhere that knew anything about us would come by with something, you know, like hot meals in the evening. One old fellow came by and he says, "You got to have $10, Wes, because I see you going up to the hospital," you know. And I had a little Pinto at that time, and it was very economical for commuting and stuff. And he said, "You have to." I said, "No, I can't take your money, you know. Thank you, but I just can't take." And he just insisted that I take his $10. Finally, I ended up having to take the $10 and thank him, you know, for that. And other people would come in, you know, all the neighbors, just everybody we'd known down there came and offered to help in some fashion, some way. And it just really made me feel like, you know, these are folks, you know, this is folks. And folks are everywhere in this country kind of very similar because of our common ancestral values background. And it's kind of interesting. And so in that sense, there aren't, you know, like somebody was saying something about Californicators. Somebody down in Eureka Springs, I remember one time said, we're talking about how there's Californicators, you know, like there's too much sex and drugs out there, and we don't want too much of that stuff around here, and kind of gave me a little glare, you know. But basically, you know, it's sort of like, you know, you got the same attitudes all over the country, up and down, you know. There's conservatives in all parts of the country, and there's liberal. I don't even think liberal is a good term anymore. I mean, it just seems so, you know, doesn't apply, but certainly conservative, I don't know, kind of mixed feelings about things like that, you know, and it goes into the lyrics of music and how people feel and so forth, and I guess it's kind of, the country is really a very pragmatic thing, as I see it. The country is so pragmatic. It's like, if you can do something and it's useful, hey, you got a place. There's going to be somebody that's going to cooperate with you, and you're going to get along just fine. You know what I mean? It's pretty much like that. And so I guess that's pretty much why or how I view this part of the country, and why I kind of enjoy being here. In fact, not too long ago, I asked my wife, I said, maybe we ought to go back to California, you know, because there's so much, you know, that we miss or something in California. And my wife, who's, you know, born in Cedars, Lebanon, Hollywood, you know, bred and trained and all the tastes and everything of all that little better quality of life. I'm at home here. I'm at home here, Wes. And it took 30 years, but still, it's kind of interesting, you know. And we're very thankful of that, or at least I certainly am, and our family is. So basically, the music deal around here, I do listen, to NPR a lot. In fact, that's my main radio station. Once in a while, I listen to the AM station, and I love the discussions, a lot of times. But I've kind of kept from calling up the radio stations because I don't want to get into too heavy of a dialogue, publicly exactly. But there's the NPR station out here is just so great, and Mike Smith, and all the news, it's the same in San Francisco too. Everybody listens to the very similar type of stuff. Like there's people out there that really love bluegrass, and there's a whole, in fact, Jerry Garcia, he loved that stuff. A lot of those bands got their start, with banjos and stuff like that, and then they got electrified and did a lot with the electric and the light shows. We put on a huge light show things, and what?
Mr. Owsley.
Yeah, and there was Owsley, the new dimension.
Electrified.
And all electrified. So there were a lot of things that were kind of interesting. Actually, there was a thing out there that began called the Trips Festival that happened in 1966, in January 1966. It kind of set the stage for what I would say is modern media events, except for the pyrotechnics. I'd say that's something totally different, but in terms of rock and roll and musical events. And the Trips Festival had this great big structure in the middle of this big hall, and on top of that there were projectors aiming on all the walls, and it was in a rounded big building there, the Longshoremen's Hall in San Francisco, which was kind of an octagonal building. And so all the walls had light shows, and then they put on at the Trips Festival, they had drama and plays, people, brand new plays, like the mime troupe, San Francisco mime troupe got in there with their politics plays, and people would comment from the galleries about all the stuff that went on. It's kind of interesting about that. And then also there were these incredible things. People just brought all their hobby constructions in their garages and basements where they were gluing together amplifiers and projectors, and early on sound machines and computers, really, early primitive computer type stuff. And it formed a kind of a vortex of interest in technological sound making and light show stuff and things of that sort. And then it kind of went off into the dance halls where we had light shows and the whole spectrum of everything went on into the Fillmore and the Avalon. And it was like a really, I think, unique in the Bay Area that happened. And then, of course, it spread around. But now, that was before they did seats, where you go to a concert and you sit. This is still back, the Trips Festival is full of dancing, and people just love the dancing part of it. And I think that's one of the better things about it, too. But it sort of set the stage for a different means of having these group gatherings where people would get together. And it had a kind of a religious sense to it, because there was also the purpose of getting out of war, which was a major concern. There was like 55,000 young men and women died in Vietnam, and then I think that doesn't count the Vietnamese who died, which I think were something like 300,000 or more. I don't know how many, a lot more died that were Vietnamese. And so part of our thing was to be happy and enjoy life out there, but part of it also is that we became kind of aware of the importance of where our values are, as a nation. It wasn't just a little piece of our country, but the whole country has these values that are so important to what we do. And it's just, music is the way in which it really comes out, and people writing lyrics, you know. And in fact, Bob Dylan met this one friend of mine out there who's a poet, and he wasn't all that successful a poet or anything, but Bob Dylan said, here, gave him a zither, I think it's called, and the thing you hold, you know, and you kind of, it's a zither thing. And he told him, he said, you know, and I thought, I can't remember the quotes exactly, you know, but he's saying basically, if you're going to be a poet and a bard, you really need an instrument, you know, music, because people pay more attention if you're making music. It's much more of a common appreciation than just people spouting off their poetry, right? And that's pretty much is what was going on with the new songs that came out, and for that a year, and then we sort of ended up kind of, I don't know, I can't ever figure out how KISS got started. Yeah. What?
M-O-N-E-Y.
M-O-N-E-Y, yeah, that's part of it. And then when they, KISS and different rock bands started in, and they started taking those lyrics and different, it got really weird. That was about kind of when it seemed to me to really lose touch with where it was good, you know, the good parts of it, for rock and roll I'm talking about. But kind of yeah?
Wes, did promoters hire you to do the posters, or did the bands, or did you just offer your services?
Well, what I did was I was working in a print shop with another guy. We had a little print shop, and we were a very low budget, you know, startup print shop, so we did things real cheap. And so people came to us, pretty much. And we did, you know, I kind of I went to San Francisco State. There was kind of like, there was an element of art, artistic people, dramatic people, and then of course the musicians that kind of, you know, like the charlatans, some of them went to San Francisco State. And so that was how I kind of got started into it. People would come to me, really, basically. And I didn't really go out and try to get work. Once I got into doing handbills and posters and stuff, I didn't really have to go hustle it or go ask somebody for work.
Did they give you free rein?
They'd come in, and yeah, and like Bill Graham, it was when the Trips Festival started. We worked with Bill because he also did the mime troupe. He managed the mime troupe, a little drama group there, and for benefits and stuff like that. And so eventually, people just started coming to me. Bill came to me and asked me to do things, and Chet, the Family Dog guy, asked me to do things for them, mainly because I was printing and delivering stuff as well as doing artwork, because there were a lot of people who could do artwork, you know, but not a lot of people could print them up, put a union label on them, and get them when they're on time. You know, that was, and cheap. That was, I think, our forte as a small printing company. And so that kind of started out that way. And then eventually, as soon as, I think it was back in just the first few weeks of 1966, I was out of the printing business and just doing artwork and getting other printers to print up what I would do. So that's kind of how that worked. And people would just come and ask me to do stuff, you know. And so I've really kind of benefited from becoming quickly notorious, you know, or something.
How'd you do the Beatles poster? Remember the last one they did?
Yeah, the last Beatles poster deal was a radio station in San Francisco that was partly responsible for putting up, having their show at the Candlestick and Candlestick Park there. And by the way, Candlestick Park has been crunched up now and has turned into gravel. It's gone. But anyway, that was a radio station, and they asked me to do it because I'd been doing the Fillmores. And during that time period, I was doing so many different things that I really couldn't quite get the Beatles one done on time. And of course, being a printer, you know, deadlines are, you can't mess with, when there's a date that something's going to happen, you can't have a problem with deadlines. And so I just finally decided, well, my ambitions on this poster were really grand, but I just can't do this outside lettering, so I ended up just writing in just the last, desperate moment. I just wrote in brush, Candlestick Park and the date. But the inside is pretty good, it's more carefully done. And so that was their last event, their last show, basically. So that turned into quite a classic. Yeah.
Did the Rolling Stone contact you on that last cover?
Yeah, Rolling Stone they get in touch with me. Now I got a website, see, so and Rolling Stone had me do a cover. That was very nice, because Jan Wenner used to work for Ramparts out there, a little magazine in San Francisco. And so that, there's a little connection there, but that was nice of them to do that. But they're celebrating the Grateful Dead 50-year anniversary. Kind of amazing it's 50 years. Yeah, it is amazing. Because they're, it's just really hard to imagine that it's been 50 years since all this transpired. And, but yeah, and pretty much that website brings people. Actually recently did something for the Mad Men, that show on TV that just quit. And they wanted me to give them some ideas. And I couldn't believe, I'm not going to say the amount of money, but I couldn't believe the money that we were talking about. And anyway, they just for ideas. It's a New York idea, money. And so I ended up, it was very nice, the money, it helps a lot. But it was really unknown, I had no idea that this could happen, and sure enough. And so the website was really good for bringing in business. If you're out on a farm in the Ozarks, right, then people can, and I get a lot of communications because of that. And another interesting thing to mention is that, Steve Jobs was working in a garage with Wozniak making the Mac or, whatever they came up with, their personal computer idea back in the 60s. And they, I think, probably went to the Fillmore and, looked like hippies, in the pictures of Steve and those guys. And the thing is that I think so many, with the computer, the personal computer, the early on idea of that is communication with the web. And how that a person can sit there with a computer and be in touch with anybody, the whole world. I've got some Facebook friends in Russia. I get, and when I say thank you so and so, I just copy their name in Russian. It's and put it in our thank you, whatever that name is, and I have different alphabets and stuff.
Well, wasn't your business part of that was the art poster? You were trying to do computer and graphic type in Aurora?
Well, yeah. Now, I did a magazine back, the Off the Wall magazine, and that was because posters, events are on the wall, and then when they're off the wall, then they're collector items, and then that was a big factor. In fact, now, I started a thing out in San Francisco. When we were on the farm, I had this idea to start an annual thing in San Francisco, which I called the Rock Poster Expo, for want of a better name. And in Golden Gate Park, and we had got the Hall of Flowers, a little county fair building. There wasn't the big glass one people think about, but it was another one. And then we had these events out there. And so I put on 3 events, and it kept growing, but it got too complicated. To try to run it all from Aurora. I had, I was the executive producer, and the thing was that as soon as it starts making headway and getting someplace, all kinds of things happen. Like some guy decides to copyright the name that I was using, So then I couldn't use it or something, Rock Poster, Rock Poster Expo, and then Art Rock comes along, and there's some of the more, really lousy people that run some of these promotional things in that realm, actually. And it was just kind of like dog eat dog, if we can leverage some money out of you or sue you out of something. You know, it's weird, things that happen. And then also we even got into an argument legally with the Family Dog producer, Chet Helms, my good buddy, because he wanted to have more control over the images for the Family Dog without any input from, in my case, from, you know, if I wanted to reproduce one or something, I'd reproduce it, and then if I sold it, he'd get half, and that was always understood. But that he had to decide what to do, that was a, you know, no, that was do good. Because he also went bankrupt at some point, and so it was kind of like, well, I don't know about that judgment there. Let's let us do some stuff. So we ended up with this kind of an argument with the promoters. And it turned out to be a thing where we did events that were benefits, and Jerry, actually, Garcia came and did one of our benefits for us, helped pay for it. It cost $55,000 just to get, and the ultimate thing there was that we all got the right of these 5 artists, and I was one of them, to do stuff with our own art that we'd done for the Family Dog without having to get Chet's approval. And that was the whole gist of the whole argument for $55,000. And then he did change his mind, and he said, oh, okay. But it was due to lawyers and complications. No disparagement on lawyers, though. I mean, they're good. They straighten out a lot of crooked things, and so that's good. But are there, let's see, I don't know if I've talked long enough yet or not. So maybe there's some questions. I should answer some questions.
Could you introduce your wife to us?
Yes. Eva Christine is my dear wife of decades and decades.